evening. What do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
5 true stories confirm the existence of sliders. This audio is brought to you by YouAreCreators Inc. Are you a slider? A slider is a person that unconsciously or consciously causes electronic interference or electrical disturbances by merely going around certain appliances and objects. These disturbances usually occur when the individual is in an extreme state of excitement, anger, fear, happiness, or even with a clear mind. Sliders have been known to blow out light bulbs, stop clocks, turn off streetlights, and even affect television sets. In 2000, Dr. Richard Wiseman at the University of Hertfordshire in England did extensive research into SLI, or sliders. He has concluded that ESP, extrasensory perception, is a real thing and should be conducted on a larger scale. Here are 5 slider stories that proves our consciousness and the energy we emit has a direct effect on the world around us. 1. Shooting off energy. I had an apparent slider experience a year ago. I used directed energy to accelerate my own healing processes and occasionally practice meditation, and also am perhaps more than typically aware of the energies of people and places. However, this experience was very unusual and completely unsought. I was visiting my stepfather while he was in a hospital in Knoxville, Tennessee. After a series of diabetes-related illnesses and the loss of one leg to the disease, he had suffered a completely debilitating stroke. I was very close to him, and on this particular evening, left the hospital feeling half out of my mind with sorrow and anger at all he was suffering. I had to walk from the hospital to my hotel, a distance of about a mile. It was dusk when I left the hospital, and by the time I was still a few blocks from the hotel, it was completely dark. I was crying, and mentally, physically, with every fiber of my being, I was screaming at the universe. I was shooting the energy out of the top of my head, half hoping it would become a laser to penetrate the heavens. As I walked in this state, I slowly became aware that the route was inexplicably becoming steadily darker. I came out of my distress enough to realize that the cause was the extinguishment of some of the huge lights extending over the freeway next to which I was walking. These lamps were perhaps 25 feet tall, and the lights in them perhaps 3 to 5 feet long, really big. I looked back and saw that 2 or 3 of the lamps had gone out. I looked around to see if a general blackout was occurring, but stores and buildings around me and stoplights ahead were still lit. By then, I'd reached another lamp, and at the instant I walked under it, it went out. That one just seemed an odd coincidence. When I reached the next, and it also went out at the very instant I crossed beneath it, I made the connection to my raging laser directed skyward. Startled and a little frightened, I stopped and pulled myself together and continued the rest of the route without incident. In retrospect, there may have been one additional light that went out. I checked the next night to see if the lights were still out, wondering if, after all, it might have been a chance power interruption. But the lamps were all still out. Although I'd always had a rather token belief in the power of directed energy, this experience made me wonder about all the intense, focused hatred in the world and how it affects the thoughts and emotions of distant others without their knowledge, and perhaps even our weather, our atmosphere. 2. Can make streetlights pop at will. For years, I have driven under streetlights and they would pop. On one occasion, as I was driving down the main drag in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, I counted 14 streetlights pop. It was embarrassing. And I was with a client. I counted to about 9, and then he noticed and said, "Have you noticed those lights popping over us?" I said. Not really, but that's strange. Thank God we got to the restaurant 5 pops later. I have even had the experience of standing on a sidewalk and looking at a light and saying, "Pop," and it would go out. My ex-boss was a witness to this. He thought it was a coincidence, and so I did it again. When I used to cruise town with my girlfriends, it would be a nightly thing to count how many lights would go out. Now, 19 years later, when I drive my son to Grandma's before school, we count the lights. The strange thing is that there are always 2 of the same lights that pop. We'll get close to them and both look and say, "Here it goes." It's gotten quite comical. My parents were very interested in this occurrence at the beginning, but now have accepted it as something that just happens. My theory is unlike any I've read. I believe it's something to do with the aura or power of someone's being. When I'm pleased with an event, excited about my performance, and expecting rewards, this is when I most often pop a streetlight. I do it so often that I've analyzed each and every happening. I ask myself, what are you feeling? Most often, it is as I mentioned above. 3. Freaked Out My Friends. From the age of 24, I knew that something very strange was happening in relation to streetlights going out on me. This has been happening for many years now, with some powerful events often leaving me literally in the dark. It all seemed to suddenly become apparent in 1986 in Brisbane, Australia. My roommates and I were all going out nightclubbing this particular night. We ran down to the bus stop, which was on the other side of the road, to go into the city. As we reached the bus stop, the street light went out. We all made a big commotion, with lots of oohs and ahs, had a good laugh, and went on the bus. A few weeks later, we all were going out again. I was running behind the others as my shoelace had come undone. My mates were already sitting at the bus stop. When I came across, the street lights went out. Lots more oohs and ahs, and my friends made a big commotion about me making the light go out. We all had a great laugh, and I actually remember saying, "It's just a coincidence." We didn't think any more of it until the next time we were all going out a few weeks later. We got to the bottom of the hill, and one of my friends said, "Neil, you go first and see if the light will go out." I said, "Oh yeah, I'm sure it will go out again," in honest sarcasm. I crossed the road, and the light went out. I fell quiet. There was an uncomfortable laughter from my friends back across the road. Someone yelled for me to come back, so I did, and the light came on again. No one could believe this was happening, least of all me. We then all crossed the road together, and the street light went out again. We all sat in silence. As we rode off in the bus, the street light came on again. It was at this point that I really did believe something completely foreign to my standard perception of the world was now being challenged. As the years have moved on, so too has my continued ability, though uncontrolled, to make the lights go out, the whole street go out, the suburbs around me go out, the towns go out, sparking light poles and even exploding light bulbs. The majority of times this happens to me is when I feel very content, and it usually happens when my friends are around. Far too many times to be coincidence. 4. Stops clocks often. Street lights go out for me much more often when I'm really relaxed, driving along not thinking about much. Once I moved to a different town, and the city utilities guys came over to ask if we could avoid a certain street where the lights were going out and not going back on. Usually, the newer street lights will go back on in a few minutes. Street lights also go out when I walk under them too, usually the older lights. I have one necklace watch that lasted for years by hardly ever wearing it. All the other watches I have ever owned have never lasted for more than 2 weeks. I now only use my car clock. Yeah, I get tired of buying light bulbs. Also, electric toys never last very long while around me. My son once tortured me with a big magnet. He made me close my eyes, then put it near my arms. I could feel it pulling on me. Not a pleasant feeling, although it didn't hurt. Maybe there is a connection between the lights and the effects of magnets on people who cause streetlights to go out. My advice? Don't waste your money on watches. 5. Stops car battery. I believe I may be a slider too. Ever since I first started driving a few years ago, I noticed that the street lights at night will go off when I drive under them. I used to think it had to do with me speeding, and somehow those lights were set up to go off when people were going too fast. But then other things would happen too. Light bulbs will blow out when I turn on lights. A brand new blow dryer stopped working 2 days after I bought it. But the biggest thing to happen to me was about 4 months ago. I had just bought my first new car and was so excited. One day I was out shopping and had only had the car for a month at that point. I finished shopping and went to get into the car to leave. My car was dead. No lights, no clock, no gauges, nothing. Thoroughly irritated about my new car dying, I had it towed back to the dealership. The serviceman got into the car, and it started immediately. They tested the entire car, turned it on and off at least 25 times with no problems at all. Did my car die because of me? It hasn't happened since, but I still get the streetlights going off. I hope someone figures out what this is. People without it have no idea of the frustration. These are 5 true stories that confirms the existence of people with ESP, extrasensory perception, also known as sliders. If you have had similar experiences, please leave a comment below.